I warmly welcome you to this panel discussion on behalf of the International Anti-Corruption Academy, IACA, and the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITA, which I am representing here. Thank you very much for joining this event, and I'm especially glad to see the students of our first cohort of the joint IACA-UNITA Master's Program in Anti-Corruption and Diplomacy that started only this year. At this point, maybe a little warning. A warning because during the panel, you might feel like anti-corruption and diplomacy, this is exactly what you want to study, but the applications for the masters are almost closed. So however, we are launching another program, the Executive Diploma in Anti-Corruption and Diplomacy in March 2022. And the Executive Diploma is a 6 months in-career program that will offer you unique insights both into practice and theory to anti-corruption and diplomacy. It's really highly interdisciplinary and covers a wide range of topics such as ethics, cyber diplomacy, negotiation skills, journalism. You see a lot of topics are covered. So applications are still open and a few places left. So please send me your application as soon as possible. You will find the link to the website of the Executive Diploma in the chat. Before we begin with the panel, please let me allow to quickly explain the rules of procedure. We will start with a discussion among the panelists and then go over to a Q&A with all of you. So kindly write down your questions and send them either through the chat or through the Q&A tool, which you can find below. I will forward them to our moderator, Larry Johnson, who will pose the question to the panelists afterwards. Thank you so much, Larry, for leading us through this discussion. And Larry D. Johnson has had a career in international law, serving with the United Nations, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. He retired from the UN at the level of Assistant Secretary General for Legal Affairs and is currently the permanent observer at the UN for the International Anti-Corruption Academy. I wish you all an interesting discussion and give the floor to you, Larry. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Katerina, and welcome to all of you. This is going to be a very interesting session, and I hope you benefit from it. Linking corruption and climate change is not your usual program. So I congratulate both UNITAR and my colleagues in IACA for having organized this. And I also want to thank very much the students in the master's program for joining us and for helping us launch this panel. And also I want to thank in particular our panelists, Ms. Anna Maria Kleinmeyer and Marcelo Rocha and Pavan Kumar Sinha for joining us today. So Katerina has given us the rules of procedure, so I think we can just proceed. So let me first give a few words of introduction. They're not enough words of introduction, but to give you an idea who our panelists are. Anna Maria Kleinmeyer is the advisor on ozone protection, climate change, water resources, and sustainable development policy and law. She's an expert on international law and policy advisor to governments and global institutions on these issues, and in general on environmental protection and sustainable development. She specializes in climate change, as I mentioned before, ozone layer protection, transboundary water resources management, providing advice to governments in the climate and ozone treaty negotiations. She's worked on environmental compliance and water resources management for the World Bank and as senior advisor in the Secretary of Environment in the Argentine Ministry of Sustainable Development, and as a senior advisor for climate change to a global think tank, and has created her own independent consulting platform. Thank you for joining us, Anna Maria. And Marcelo Auscher, he's an expert on climate change governance and corporate policy. He holds a PhD in environmental economics and has a long-standing experience in environmental projects in developing countries and in climate change issues, particularly those relating to mitigation projects, carbon market, and monitoring, reporting, and verification requirements, as well as being a trainer for capacity building. He was one of the lead negotiators for Brazil. Marcelo has a deep understanding of current international climate change rules relating to accounting and transparency, including guidelines established by the UNFCCC and the IPCC. And Mr. Pavan Kumar Sinha, he's IACA's Director of Academic Programs, has had a career in civil service in India, spanning more than 3 decades. He's held several senior positions in administration, including anti-corruption, tax assessment, customs processes, and automation, intelligence and investigation, research, and training. So happily, again, I congratulate UNITAR and IACA for having put together such a distinguished panel of experts in these 2 fields. Let me give you a brief introduction of what we'll be talking about. The intricate linkages between corruption and climate change need to be clearly understood and discussed at national and international levels. Both threaten human life. It has been empirically established that corruption fuels climate change. As a corollary, climate action plans cannot succeed without fighting corruption. The UN Sustainable Development Goals demand urgent actions to combat climate change and corruption in various forms. The current virtual panel discussion will address the major issues of corruption and climate change, including some of the key aspects of COP26 on this front. It will focus on the crucial role of diplomacy and international negotiations in achieving the SDGs on climate change and in hardwiring anti-corruption measures into climate action and policies. And let me add my own personal remark that this also applies to, I just mentioned COP26, but there will be a meeting of the states parties of the Convention Against Corruption coming up soon. We're not quite sure if it will be postponed. It is now scheduled for 2 weeks from now in Egypt. But in any event, the corruption states parties should also examine the linkage between corruption and climate change, as we'll be discussing. And I'd particularly like to ask our panelists in their remarks, if they feel it appropriate, to perhaps examine how the climate change issue poses different challenges in the corruption field. Because as opposed to what might be seen traditional corruption, which might be seen as either greed or power influence as the motivating factors for things like fraud, embezzlement, fraudulent bidding, data manipulation, influence peddling that moves into the illegal area of corruption. All of that, how that is a little different in the climate change area, where it's not just greed or maybe even power, but rather you have particular political interest groups that are opposed to climate change and the measures that the climate change policymakers are trying to achieve for policy reasons, either self-interest, for example, the coal industry corporations together with coal industry workers. So you have whole communities against climate, perhaps, policies. Or you have basically anti-government, anti-regulation. How ideology factors more into the climate change area than perhaps the normal corruption situation. Anyway, with that, let me start it off by asking Anna Maria whether, in considering the climate change in the global climate goals for 2030 and beyond, what role do governance and corruption play in the achievement of these goals. Anna Maria?
Thank you, Larry, and good afternoon to everyone, or good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to just quickly thank UNITAR and IACA for organizing this really important event. It's a topic that doesn't get enough attention, but really needs the attention now as we embark on the coming decade of critical action on climate change and beyond that. So, to your question, I think it's an issue that we really need to dig in on. How are we going to, how are we as global citizens and countries in this cooperative global journey to address climate change? How can we do it in a way that ensures delivering the results that we need? I'm going to just cover some points. This is a very rich topic, and we have a limited amount of time. So what I'm choosing to do today is just highlight some of the key points that will hopefully spark your own conversations with each other, with colleagues and others, so that you take these ideas forward and help find the answers. I certainly don't have all the answers for you. I think actually as a collective is where we do find the answers. So let me just start by saying that financing of climate change and the institutions that deliver that financing and deliver implementation of projects, they are at the heart of addressing climate change. They really are at the heart of it. And when we think about corruption, and we understand the breadth and reach of the governance of our countries, of our world, clearly corruption is the cancer that prevents a system from functioning in a healthy manner, from being able to do the job that needs to be done. The mobilization and the delivery of huge amounts of financing, and many of you may be familiar with the $100 billion goal to address climate change. That's a goal that was set out in 2010. The intention was that by 2020, every year the world would mobilize at least $100 billion to address climate change, both the mitigation and the adaptation side. That's a huge amount of money, and that money is mobilized through donor governments. Can be mobilized through other even private sector channels, philanthropy, but it needs to be delivered to the countries, to the communities where mitigation or adaptation projects will be delivered to achieve the many goals that we have, the goals of reducing emissions by at least 45%, 85%. Each country has varying specific goals, but the point is that that the money needs to be not only raised in a way that meets that $100 billion goal or beyond, but then delivered to the projects to have the impact that is required. What happens with corruptions in the institutions, whether they be the global institutions, national institutions, local institutions, is that it degrades the channel through which the financing flows. But corruption is also it's also an aspect on the rule-making, rule-keeping side of things. And in addition to financing for climate change being one of the key elements to delivering climate action, countries are also, and you all may be familiar with the nationally determined contributions, every country has committed on the basis of their national circumstances. They have made promises or commitments, pledges of what they will do at a national level to address climate change. Again, both the mitigation and the adaptation side. And delivering on those pledges, delivering on the NDCs as they're called, requires countries, and will require countries to not only enforce the laws that exist to further reduce emissions, but to develop new laws to strengthen the laws and regulations that are in place. But I would say that, you know, to a great extent, there will be many new regulations, you know, that will be required to improve the mitigation of climate emissions, and also to protect people from the impacts of climate change, right? So that's the adaptation side, sometimes discussed as the environmental justice side of things, right? As the planet heats, for example, how can we ensure that the heating of the planet doesn't end up affecting people's health, or even lead to mortality in areas where there isn't refrigeration, where there isn't air conditioning, or where cooling is insufficient, right? So the laws and regulations that will protect people from the impacts of climate change are equally important. When corruption reigns, when there is not a rule of law, or even when there's, you know, slight degrees of corruption, and there's an inadequate system to enforce the rules and regulations, or there is insufficient compliance with those rules and regulations, then those rules, those laws are less effective. So with that landscape in mind, let's think for a moment about our goals and about this critical 10 years ahead, or in fact, less than 10 years, if we use the 2030 goalpost as one of our first objectives in terms of addressing climate change. In the last couple of years, while many of us have been sheltering from home or working from home, the UN system broadly, not just the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, but many UN institutions and the countries that are members of those institutions have been discussing through forums like this one, virtual forums, some of them led by Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, others led by heads of national banks, others led by the head of the United Nations Environment Program. In those forums, the discussions have been around this critical decade. Why is there a critical decade now? Why don't we have more than 10 years? Or why are our leaders talking about a 10-year sprint? Because science and scientists have told us that this is the critical decade to curb climate emissions, to address the climate impacts that countries are starting to feel. If we don't do as much as we need to do in this decade, the impacts will be much worse for us in the future. The costs will be much worse for us in the future. So, and I'll wrap up now, and hopefully there'll be questions and we can continue this conversation, because I would love to hear from participants and others. What do you feel is a critical part or piece of reducing corruption, strengthening the rule of law, and ensuring that we can deliver the finance and put in place the rules and regulations we need to meet our goals by 2030? In the next question that I'll be answering when we come back around after our other speakers, we'll talk a little bit about some concrete suggestions. But in the meanwhile, you can think through some of those. And actually, you know, I'd love to hear even in the chat what some of your thoughts are. Thanks, Larry, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the other speakers as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Anna Maria. And indeed, please, participants, feel free to use the chat and the Q&A. And even if we don't get to them in this program, I hope Pavan and Katerina can go over them later and deal with some of the important issues that have already been raised in the chat that I see. But let's go on to the next question for Marcelo, and let me from the very beginning apologize for having mangled your name when I first introduced you, because trying to get it right, of course, I got it wrong. So I apologize, Marcelo. But in exchange, I will give you a very small, very discreet, narrow question that is very easily answered in the first 5 seconds, which is, do you believe that climate change is one of the most dangerous phenomena that the entire world is facing? Are we doing enough to mitigate the problem and reach the targets? Are international negotiations, including this climate summit like COP26, effective? That's a small little topic I thought you'd like to dispose of quickly.
Thank you, Larry. Well, before I answer the question, let me also thank Unitari and ICA for inviting me. I think this is a very interesting discussion, and definitely I'm going to learn a lot from people that know much more the corruption and how to deal with that, or to minimize or eliminate corruption. So I'm very keen to learn from the participants and other panelists here. Well, the short answer is yes, we are facing the most dangerous challenge of our lifetimes. On top of that, we are now also having COVID. So I think we are here with big challenges in front of us, and we need to be serious about how to tackle those challenges. And I'm confident that the United Nations approach, that is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, is the best thing, or is a very good environment where we can discuss and find solution for that. That doesn't mean that we should not have other approach, bilaterals, regional approaches, or even work in a very small scales in our own communities. So we have to tackle this problem because it's, as I said, one of the biggest, if not the biggest challenges that we're going to face in our lifetimes. And together with these challenges, there is a lot of opportunities as well. So I think here I want to try to start to establish the relationship between these risks, challenges, and opportunities of climate change with corruptions by highlighting, as you pointed out, I think in your introduction remark, the different views that we have on the issue. We have, for example, coal miners or coal industries, that they have a very particular vision of this issue. And the other hand, you can pick up an example of wind farms, wind companies, or companies that plan to produce renewable energy like wind or solar. They have a vision of their own on the problems. And to be very honest here, I think both visions we have to hear and we have to understand and we have to take into consideration, because even if I am a coal miner, I have a coal industry, I may be very honest and realize, yes, I am part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. And some of them are looking for those solutions through clean coal. And let's put aside if the technology is the right one or not. My point here is that in this debate, that we are having in UNFCCC or having here or in any other place, we have to be very honest with each other, and we have to respect the different visions and to understand that maybe some people are advocating for continue to use coal because it's what they have as an opportunity now, because their jobs, their incomes depend on that. Not that they don't want to be part of the solution. I think everybody, I mean, I would say, I hope, 99% of everybody involved in this debate, they realize that the problem exists and they somehow want to contribute to the solution. Of course, with some limitations due to the characteristics or the place where they live. Sorry, my dogs start to bark in here. But anyway, so what I want to maybe put to us to debate is that if we take on board that this is the biggest challenge of our lifetimes, and there are different opinions, and we have to accommodate these different opinions in any way possible in order to achieve this goal of not having more than 1.5 increase in the temperature, we're going to have to do a lot of efforts here. And therefore, there's going to be a lot of opportunities to change or to make these changes that are necessary. And I understand that together with these opportunities, we have the risks of having more corruption, or some cases of corruptions. For example, if we decide that we're going to implement some technology, or people will be against the technology, they may use not the right ways to achieve their goals. And again, let's understand and respect the different views and goals. And of course, let's not agree that to achieve that particular goal, you may use corruption. That is not acceptable. So I think this is one thing that I want us to think about it. Let's respect these people, goals, objectives. Let's argue with them. Let's try to find solutions, but not in a way that, we should not allow them to achieve these goals through corruptions. And this could be also valid for a wind farm. If some people say, well, we're going to get this wind farm here, but we have to pay some people, or we're going to have to put a lot of political pressure that is not transparent, that is not legal, that is not ethical, then I think we should not go and allow that kind of behavior. So I think for both sides, we have to pay attention that if you want to achieve your goal, that is to have renewable, okay, go for that, do it right. If you want, for whatever reason, to keep coal mines for production for whatever numbers of years using clean technology, go for that, but do it in the right way. And unfortunately, we know that and here is where I want to learn from corruption experts. For whatever reasons, people not necessarily will play the rule or play the game in the right way. And in both sides, you can find opportunities for corruptions. And I think this is something that we have to be very, very, very aware and try to minimize. Let me stop here and also listen to others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. Indeed, I think this is the first time a particular word has been used, which is ethics, which plays an important role here, both in the whole concept of corruption and in climate change as well. And to all of you lawyers out there, it also highlights that the law can only go so far. And sometimes ethics and legitimacy need to be brought in, as well as the text of a particular regulation or law. But let me turn the floor over to Pavan. And if I can ask you, if you agree or disagree that corruption needs to be tackled if the global initiatives and climate policy are to succeed.
Thank you, Larry. And thank you, Ana Maria and Marcelo, for setting up the ground already. And Ana has already spoken about corruption and its how it adversely affects climate change policies and action plans. And certainly the question is not so easy to answer, and it is easy to answer. So first, my reaction is that yes, from my point of view, corruption is absolutely the most problematic thing in handling the climate change policies, climate actions. Why I said the other way is that I just take the cue from Larry, what you mentioned about the interest and pressure groups who look at it in a different way. And it is not just corruption, but there are certain issues because they have their own ways. And as you said, what I call the self-interest. Let me go a little granular, and my response will be more from academic point of view. So I'm sure that the two practitioners will be able to supplement what I'm mentioning. So let us look at where the problem of corruption is, and let's go to the SDGs. And you can see there is one goal 13 is purely to climate actions. And then there's goal 14 and 15. They are about life below water, and goal 15 is life on land. I think all these three are very closely related. And of course, the focus is a little bit different, but in these goals, again, we have goal 16, target 5. It says that corruption is need to be tackled in every aspects. And of course, it's a cross-cutting problem, cross-cutting issue across all the goals. And it has detrimental effect, not just on climate action policy, but all forms of governance. let me come back to the different forms of, because when we do any analysis of corruption on any part of this either society or any sector, we look into what types of corruption are in existence. And first, I would mention which is again a bit controversial, is about lobbying. And why I'm saying it is controversial, because lobbying could be a form of, it can be for a very good reason. Certain pressure groups, they create lobby and get their policies done. And many times lobbying are used as a corrupt means to capture state or capture policies. So we have a very specific form of corruption, which we call it a state capture or policy capture corruption. And if the lobby, for example, is created in a way which leads to something called illegal political financing, it's very difficult. We call it in the grand form of corruption. It's very difficult for public to know what is exactly happening unless there is a very active social groups or the civil societies which are looking at it. Second, corruption in climate financing itself. And I'm sure Maria will be able to throw light more on it. I can add later on. And then embezzlement, nepotism, bribery and kickbacks, which are normally there, extortion, and any kind of undue influence. And in our UNCAC, we call it influence peddling. So these are the different forms of corruption which we normally have. And I would give you some kind of study which has been made on RED+, which is reduction of emission through deforestation and degradation of forests. I'm sure Marcelo is an expert on this, but I'm just saying that a study was made, empirical study was made on this by some academicians, Tacconi, Brown, Larmore. They have identified certain hypothetical form of corruption, then they empirically tested and what form these are. I'm just telling you to get little bit more granular. Manipulation of baseline forest and carbon data. And this is fraudulent. Then double counting of project benefits. It could be fraud, it could be embezzlement, it could be nepotism. Misuse of benefit sharing and revenue flows. Manipulation of weak monitoring and verification system, again, fraud and collusion. Undue influence to continue activities that involve deforestation. Unclear, overlapping, and weakly enforcement or enforced regulations. And non-transparent, non-accountable decision-making. So all these forms of corruption, or all these types of, I would say, not exactly corruption, but it's a kind of a mix of fraud and corruption, are prevalent. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list. There could be more forms, and we can still look into even in climate financing. There will be similar type of kickbacks or embezzlement. All those things are happening. So this is a framework in which different forms of corruption in climate action plans or actions are in existence. So we need to tackle them very clearly. Now, I will again come to a bit of theoretical aspect that whenever we take actions, we join hands and we talk of enforcement, laws, rules. We are talking about something called the top-down approach, which means this is in theoretical terms called principal-agent framework analysis of corruption, where we have a principle, which means the people, the government, they have a government elected, so people become principal and the government becomes agent. And in the next fourth, what we call it nested principal agent framework, in which government is the principal and the people who are working under, it could be ministries, ministers, or the bureaucrats, or the people working the ground level, they become agents. Now there is always an information asymmetry, and we think that this framework thinks that there is a principled principle. There is at least somebody in the whole country or the government who is interested in controlling corruption. Climate change has a very unique problem. In many countries, as Larry mentioned right in the beginning, not necessarily because of corruption, but because of certain pressure groups, because of something I called people take the decisions in the name of so-called public interest. And this public interest is a very, very vague concept in itself. Who is the public? Whose interest it is? It's very vague. Now, in name of public interest, decisions are taken, which is actually not in the overall public interest. Then it becomes the interest of the pressure groups. Here then comes the concept of lobbying, which is in itself not a corruption, but it has a huge possibility, very thin line between lobbying and corruption. So we need to be very careful. State capture and policy capture comes through these lobbying. There's pressure groups, as was mentioned, oil industry, coal industry, paper industry, who need forest, they need timber to have their production. The industry is dependent upon these supplies, and they have a lot of people who are employed. How interest is calculated? If I stop this, the people will be unemployed. There will be problem. There will be economic problem. Country is dependent on tax revenues from these. That will not be there. These things are complicated. So this top-down approach becomes a problem. So what is another aspect? And second aspect is called collective action problem. And that is, again, we study corruption from a different point of view, that actually we engage in corruption because we think if others are doing, why should I not? And if the countries now had come to the global level of the negotiations, and there, that's why this specific focus is on negotiation. When we are negotiating at international level, why we are not reaching consensus? Why some countries say, I will not follow, and then other countries say, I will also not follow, and then there is no consensus. There is no, UNGAS 2021 revealed one point. Corruption. There is a unanimous decision that corruption is bad for the society, and we need to have a global solution. All countries, there is no country which says that corruption need not be tackled. However, in climate change, there is no unanimity, there is no consensus. Why? And I don't have much time here, but we study from game theoretic approach. We don't trust each other. They think, one country will think, if I take measures and next is not taking, why should I lose? This is called collective action problem, and collective action is also within the society. I see others polluting, why should I not? So we need another approach is to bring people together. And that is called a bottom-up approach, where the role of civil society, the government should encourage civil societies and bring people together to take action. And I will come, and maybe in the next round, I will tell about a very specific project work which was done in Bangladesh, and how political consensus is necessary, and how self-interest of the people can be aligned to get a global interest. That is the way we have to work, not just saying that to bring a good governance. No, it's not going to help, because we know what good governance is, but how to bring the good governance is a problem. So I will stop here, and I will talk more about corruption on the next phase, hearing my other panelists. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Pavan. And indeed, thank you, those of you who have contributed to the Q&A and to the chat. And thank you, Anna Maria, for having addressed some of the questions that have already been posed. But one of the questions, before we move to the second round, mentioned the word whistleblower. And it raised in my mind, in terms of all of your questions, how do we deal with this? How do we tackle it? There's in various fields of law, there's the expression unwilling or unable. And that's used in all kinds of contexts, whether it's unwilling or unable to stop armed groups in one country from spilling over into another. It's used in the international criminal law field as well. But here, unwilling to police correct implementation of climate change regulations. Is that unwilling because of political pressure, interest groups, or is it an inability, which moves you into a whole other field of assistance, training, and so on and so forth? So there's a little bit of an angle there which comes through the various discussions. But let me go to individual questions. So I wanted to ask you, Anna Maria, how can national governments and global institutions improve transparency in the mobilization and delivery of climate finance? That involves a lot of money, from what I understand.
Yeah, thanks, Larry, for that question. Thanks also to the participants for your lively discussion and questions in the chat. I'd love to see that, and how engaged you are, and really how much those questions indicate that you really know a lot and that that you have a lot to contribute to this conversation. So thanks for that. Yeah, just to touch upon this question of, you know, how do we as participants in the conversation, how encourage governments to improve the transparency. And by that, I mean, not just governments at a national level, but governments also at the international level in our global cooperation around climate change and the financing for climate change. Again, I'll just start by saying I'd love to hear from the group, from participants, you know, add to this list, but I'm just going to name a few things that came to my mind. The first is that in order to improve transparency, there has to be a recognition or an acknowledgement that it's a problem, right? That the system is not sufficiently transparent, and I don't know, and in some cases doubt that there really is that recognition of the problem. So, and you know, in order to do that, one of the questions in the chat was, you know, what do we do here? How do we get more of a conversation around this topic? We need more research. We need more publications. We need to train more journalists to understand this topic and to publish on it, so that governments and international you know, people who work in the international institutions recognize the importance of this problem. So that's number one. Number two is to once the problem is recognized, to prioritize action on transparency. So not just make it one of a checklist of many things that need to be done, but that this is a condition for the work that we're doing in mobilizing financing, transferring financing to countries. That transparency around the financing and the use of those funds is absolutely fundamental. And then to Larry's point about willingness, right? There needs to be a willingness among countries and international financial and other institutions to increase the transparency. How can they show that willingness? To introduce or enforce the rules that exist already. Many countries have laws and rules around transparency, and they aren't enforced or recognized. Build capacity in the institutions, so training and information to people is fundamental. Information campaigns linked to the climate goals would be helpful. And then I'd say investing in technologies that improve or increase the transparency is another way, by actually putting some of the money for climate change into transparency mechanisms and into the systems that support the rule of law. And then I'll just add on from the comment in the chat, encouraging and protecting whistleblowers is another key way to strengthen transparency. But add to my list, I'll stop mine there, and I'd love to read in the chat, what do participants feel would be ways to strengthen and improve transparency.
Great, thank you very much. And to you, Marcelo, what are the main opportunities or challenges for responding to climate change emergencies, as they're called, and promoting low carbon transition while minimizing the risk of corruption? Are carbon market instruments effective for promoting low carbon transition? Could they be misused or generate corruption?
Thank you, Larry. I'm going to try to respond to these questions by linking some of the messages that Ana Maria Pavan have put before me. Let me start with the word that Ana Maria has pointed out to us about the transparency. I think this is a key element, because if we go back to the lobbies and the concerns that we may have when we see lobbies in favor of some technology like coal, or lobbies even in favor of some solutions like RED, we may feel a little bit uncomfortable because maybe those lobbies are not working or playing right. They are not presenting transparent information to us. They are not explaining very clearly what are the intentions, what are the outcomes, why they are doing what they are doing. So I think this is one thing that I think is key. If everybody is very transparent about what they are doing and play by the rules and play in an ethical manner, then I personally don't see a problem with lobbies. But the problem is that not necessarily every lobby work like that. And I think this is some of the concerns and issues that Pavan has raised when he mentioned lobbies. So if we want to have the solutions for the climate emergencies or to promote the low carbon transition, I think we have to be very transparent about the approaches or the ways people understand should be those solutions or those activities. And here I think there is another aspect that is important, is education. Because even if I am transparent about what I'm planning to do, what I'm advocating to, maybe the other side don't understand, because to be honest, what is a ton of CO2? This is something that maybe the general public have no idea what we are talking about it. And then if we want to use carbon market as an instrument to promote these solutions, and again, we can come to the example of RED, people will get even more confused. I may be transparent, I may be honest, but people will not necessarily understand. Because what is a ton of CO2? What is this RED you're talking about? It? Okay, I can understand that trees can capture CO2 from the atmosphere, but all these rules about accounting, about how to measure these tons of CO2s and how to take on board biodiversity or indigenous concerns, it becomes a kind of messy information. Even if I try hard and be very transparent here, people will still not understand. And I think here is where we have the opportunity for corruption, because if I know what I'm talking about, but I don't want to be transparent about it, and I know that the other point or the other end will not necessarily understand what I'm talking, I may play here a lot and say, well, don't worry, trust me, and this is the best solution. Let's go with this RED project. Let's use on carbon markets because everything will be fine in the end. You just trust me. And I think here where we see maybe the risks of people not being very honest in presenting this information, because they know that the information is not easy to understand, and they may play in their favors when they present this information. And to conclude, again, I'm in favor of carbon markets. There is a role for carbon markets, but not that carbon markets will solve everything. So we have to be very specific where to use such instruments. And again, being transparent about what we intend to do, what we can achieve with those instruments, what they are the limitations. And make sure the other side of this conversation understand what we are talking about. And if they don't understand, maybe we have to give a step back and work a little bit on the education, so people will be with enough understanding and information to engage in such conversation or to participate in a lobby discussion and argue in favor or against that lobby in the same level of understanding and information. Otherwise, there is this imbalance, and people may take advantage of this imbalance and just put maybe too complicated things to people get afraid to react or to comment, and just say, okay, let's trust you on this one and let's move with these solutions. And sometimes maybe the solution is what is really needed, but maybe sometimes this solution is not necessarily what is needed for that particular community, time or place. And I think there is, again, transparency and education could be used or should be used to make sure that if we want to go for any debate with lobbies or without lobbies, we ensure that people have enough information and they take the decisions that they believe are the most important one, based on science, based on understanding and information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. And I was going to ask you whether you have been engaged by any of the you're talking about science and how it's not easy to explain to the public whether the health professionals have come to you to ask you to deal with COVID, because indeed many of the things you just said are exactly the kind of challenges to the non-scientific public faces with COVID and vaccines and masks, and it's a one rule one day and another rule the next day, and what are vaccines supposed to do after all? And you get the same thing. I mean, that's one of the distinguishing features of the climate field is science. It's science-based, if anything, and that's not easy to explain all of the vagaries of science and uncertainties and changes. So that's a very important point. Now, Pavan. So thank you, but watch out. They'll come to you for COVID, for explaining the COVID problem to the public as well. Pavan, do we need to realign anti-corruption measures to deal with issues relating to climate change policy, and how?
Okay, I will answer this question, but let me take a cue from Marcelo a little bit. Human beings are very, very smart. So no matter what you do, whatever solutions you find, they will find the way how to either circumvent or to be corrupt. So economists, as usual, came with the solution of carbon trading. And we have now carbon trading we have our trading platforms. But how it works, very few people really know about it. And it comes from something called right to pollute. And right to pollute is something like no industry can work without any kind of emission or pollution. So a level is fixed. And then if you are polluting less, you get some credits, and these credits can be exchanged. This is carbon trading, which is devised by the economist. Now, it's very simple to manipulate it by putting a higher level of licensing, higher level of credits, the limits to pollute. And then there is lower pollution, more credits, and the carbon trading pricing has really gone down because so much of trading is available, and the credits are available in the market. Simple demand and supply. So what I'm saying is that we really need to look into all aspects more carefully, how things are working. And then I come to a bit of on the capacity side, just a second. Sorry, I lost the screen. Okay. So on capacity, I think that we need to really make people understand. When I finish the previous part is about educating people from the bottom and to align them, and I was close to telling about the political alignment, and here I would like to explain, and then why this capacity building is important. Is one empirical testing was done in Bangladesh, where it was found that if we can bring people who are at the ground level and they have self-interest, that is, they want their business to grow, and that area, as you know, Bangladesh is always affected by cyclones and the flood. So it was found that the people who are at the bottom level, who are elites in the rural area, elites who have business or who have agriculture, if they are invested in a project which has a dual use. Why dual use? For example, if you make an embankment and make a road on the embankment. So when you make a road on the embankment, there is always a clear benefit flowing out of it. From economics point of view, the elites will benefit more. There will be more inequality because they will be earning more. But at the same time, this is a factor which brings other people together. And here is the role on corruption. But when more and more people are involved, they can fight corruption much better. So this is a project where it was found that climate problems were tackled by bringing a new way of economic approaches. So why I'm saying these things, that we need to train people, the people who are at the ground level. It is not just necessary that they only know about climate change. They should know about the mentality, the social behavior of the people, and then they can approach and tackle problem in a better way, the problem of corruption and climate change together. So that is why the word which you used, Larry, that we must hardwire anti-corruption into climate action policy is the crux. We have to make both the two problems. The solutions should be such we can bring synergy between two problems. I will end here. I'd add more because there are some questions, very interesting question in the chat, but I think Anna has to leave earlier, so I will rather give floor to her to add a few more things. Larry, back to you.
Thank you very much, Pavan. And indeed, we only have a few more minutes. And Anna, would you like to say a few things before you have to leave? And I noticed there was one particular chat question that was addressed to you. We can either deal with it now or hopefully later, that dealt with the U.S. In particular problem of getting holding U.S. transnationals accountable in beneficial ownership transparency. Maybe if you could tell us what that means.
Larry, I thank you, and I wish I had the answer to that. It's a bit beyond my scope of work, but I think I do recognize, as you know, as many do in the conversations around global governance, the role of multinationals and the challenges to holding them to standards, rules, and recognizing their involvement and role in corruption globally. So I don't have the answer to the question, but I would say that it's an important one to perhaps explore more through research or the next conversation that you have, like this one, the next webinar. It's been a pleasure to be here with everyone. Really, what a great conversation and I would love to stay in touch with folks and hear more about it. I look forward to reading papers and articles and op-eds written by participants and others who are inspired by this webinar, because the conversation is critical. It's widespread. I mean, climate change affects every aspect of our lives. It's either caused by or impacting every single aspect of our daily lives, our governments, and our global interactions and cooperation. So really, really critical to see how we can continue to improve and strengthen the systems that will deliver the action we need on climate. Thank you, Larry. I believe that the conversation will continue without me, so I'm sorry I have to leave. I'll check out the video recording later on, but it's been a pleasure. Thanks to everyone.
Thank you again very much for taking your valuable time, and all best wishes. We hope to see you again. Great. So let me return to in fact, something that Pavan, you mentioned, and others, and Marcelo also, the idea of benefits. I mean, how you encourage. So it's not only a matter of enforcing rules and regulations, but it's also a matter of making it in people's interests to comply or to follow. So the example that you gave in Bangladesh of the embankment being also used as a road. I think there are lots of, maybe Marcelo, you could give us some examples or know something about all of the sort of tax incentives or other incentives that governments have used. For example, I think in California, in certain areas you cannot build a house unless you provide solar panels for heating or something like that. I mean, there are all kinds of tax incentives. It's like the carbon credit issue as well, where you get some sort of benefit from doing it. So it's not only hitting somebody over the head with a hammer, but it's a carrot and stick approach. How has that worked, for both of you? Any comments?
Well, Pavan, if you want to start, please go.
No, actually, I'll just add few things. The example which I gave, I think these are the innovative ways which we have to think. Realigning people's interests is the major solution, because here we are dealing with a problem where there are multiple interest groups, pressure groups. They have their own interests. Now we have to find the thread which brings the interest together. And there comes the role of diplomacy. Actually, that is what I was, also referring to earlier. That diplomacy doesn't mean at international diplomats sitting together. Talking. Basically, it is bringing consensus. Whether these are people in the rural areas, even illiterate people who do not know much, the people should be able to negotiate and come to a common consensus, which is best for the society or for the country or for the globe. So of course, these things are happening at different levels, but every industry or every, I would say sector will have its own unique approaches where they can think of this kind of dual approach where, collective action, there's one theory of collective. It says that collective action is only successful when people start an action together. And there is something what they call is low-hanging fruit. So if people see that their joint effort is succeeding, they are more motivated and there will be more sustained collective action. So these are the approaches are necessary in climate change action policy. We have to think. So we cannot give one simple example. And you rightly mentioned that a regulation saying to have a house only if there is a solar panel, something like that. And some misinformation need to be, you'll be very surprised that one of the politicians in political statement in India said that hydel projects take away power of water. Misinformation to the people, and people will say, oh, how stupid it is. So the problem is that there are a lot of people who also, because of their political interest, or if they have certain things to say against the projects, they will create misinformation. So again, I am coming back to empowering people, knowledge, capacity. These are very, very important points which we need to deliver. And in this particular field, climate change or climate action and corruption, I can see on chat we have a question, do we have any program at IACA? I think it's a right beginning. Today's panel discussion is a beginning because such discussions are very rare on international front or at international or national level. It is the high time as a part of the climate action that such kind of programs, which of course IACA is also spearheading on the anti-corruption side, should be done, especially along with the agencies which are also very active in climate action. So here I will Marcelo, you have to say anything?
Yeah, no, thank you, Pavan. Let me follow up with some of your previous comments. I completely agree with you that people are smart, and if you force them to some kind of rule and they are not convinced this rule is on their benefit, they will find a way to overcome this rule, or they're going to use corruption to go against the rule. So I think you are completely right here. And I think we have to make sure that these rules, people understand the benefits. And sometimes the benefit is in the pocket. I mean, you have to demonstrate in the short term what will be the economic benefit that they may gain if these rules is implemented. Maybe it's a short term or short way of approach the problem, but maybe it's where people will feel first if they are being benefit in terms of the rules or not, if the money in the pocket is bigger, a little bit bigger. And I think I can give some very concrete examples. For example, here in Brazil, I think one of the reasons why we have the use of a lot of renewable energy, particularly for transportation. And let's put aside a little bit about all the concerns that people may have with ethanol being produced to sugarcane, and if this is causing or not deforestation. Let's put aside a little bit this and not just focus on the decision that people have to make every day if they go to they need to use a car and they decide, should I put gasoline or should I put ethanol? In Brazil, we have flex fuels cars, so people make this decision every day. And most of the time, the decision is not, well, we're going to use ethanol because this is more sustainable and will not have a huge impact in climate change. They don't think like that. They don't think, what is the price of ethanol? What is the price of gasoline? And how much I can use my car putting one of those? So at the end, people do this, not every day, they do the math, but they keep this in their mind. And again, so the use of a lot of renewable energy is because up to now, the prices, the comparative price between gasoline and ethanol are making a lot of people to use ethanol. personally, I have also the same experience. I have to use a car because I live outside the city. And for many years, I didn't buy a hybrid car because the price was too high. And I did the math and I thought, well, it was going to take me many years to pay the investment that I have to, if I want to buy a hybrid car. So even I'm supposed to have all the information, I'm supposed to walk the talk, I still have to do the math at the end of the day and see if I can afford to have that particular solution. So I think we have to make sure that people are smart. They will find a way to overcome a rule unless we can demonstrate that there are real benefits for them in the short term. And these benefits for most of the people will be economic benefits. So if we can try to demonstrate that, I think it's one way to move. And doing that, again, doing in a way that people will not have, okay, I'm still not convinced, or the economic benefit is not that much, and I will prefer to go and try to corrupt the system to make sure that I still have the highest benefits according to my standard or according to what I want to achieve. And here, on a personal note, I believe by nature we are good people, and nobody wake up in the morning and say, I'm gonna want to emit carbon because I want to have climate change impacts. I want future generations to be in a bad planet. I don't think nobody has this kind of thinking. And it's the same way nobody wake up in the morning, I'm gonna be a corrupt person today because I like it. I mean, maybe there are some pathologic cases, but this is a different kind of people, and we can deal with that with some prison and medications. But I truly believe by nature we are good, and we make those choices to emit more or less, or to be corrupt or not to be corrupted, sometimes because of misinformation, because we are looking only for the short-term benefits. So if we can change this, give the short-term benefits of doing the right thing, like using low carbon technologies and not be corrupted, people will behave better. Thank you.
Well, that's terrific, Marcelo and Pavan. One thing I would add is that people are indeed smart, and they're smart in terms of devising ways to get around regulations. But that's why I like the word whistleblower. It's not exactly the most technical term, is it? But it tells you what it is. People are smart common sense. So even without, whatever education, they can figure out if somebody's gaming the system or somebody is cheating. And somebody can say, wait a minute, what's he doing over there? He's trying to get away with something that, we, the community, have agreed this is how we're going to behave. And we're not going to do that. And he's trying to get away with something. So if and that's a question also of oops, sorry, let me get off of a call coming in. So if you use the right language and explain things that the normal person can understand, they can figure it out. They can figure it out, just like you can figure out ways to go around. You can figure out ways to be, and that's where transparency is so important, so that the people can see and people can figure out in a common sense way, this is not in our interest to have this person cheat the system. Anyway, I thought that was all very important. I did see one comment that was a general question I'll just deal with quickly, which is whether there was any international instrument on prevention and penalties for environmental hazards, especially in the oil and gas industry. And if so, is there any verification regime? Two questions there, but I don't know of any such general convention, but there might be one. The only thing I would recommend to the questioner is to go on to the website of UNEP, the UN Environmental Program, and I would assume that on their website they would have international treaties and conventions. What you do have are certainly environmental treaties that deal with particular activities, like the International Maritime Organization based in London. They have all kinds of treaties dealing with shipping and hazardous, bringing hazardous materials through, maritime commerce. And there's probably the same sort of thing in airline transport, but those are in certain sectors. I don't know if there's anything in general.
There is a
but Pavan,
there is a Basel Convention, and it has got multiple appendixes where it says that different levels of hazardous goods which can be traded across border.
yeah,
So I think that's all. And if you don't follow, then what are the international protocols to deal with those hazardous goods?
Right, exactly right. Okay, are there any other?
Marcelo?
Yes, maybe to complement this response, I want to give one case that we just had here in Glasgow. Well, first, the UNFCCC, I think, is the place where we are trying at the international level come to some kind of instruments that will guide us to more renewable energy and depend less on oil, gas, and coal. But again, this is a very, I would say, soft discussion because we cannot agree in these kind of meetings. Okay, by this date, this technology will not be allowed or something like that. So I don't think that we will be able to create such instrument or penalties within the UNFCCC. And just to give the example, in the last minutes of the COP26 in Glasgow, there was a very interesting case that the presidency, the UK president, has tabled the document in the morning with a paragraph saying that we should phase out subsidies for the coal industry. I don't remember the exact wording, but the message was quite strong and was the first time that such message was included in a decision text to be adopted by the COP, by the UNFCCC. But was not legally binding, nothing like that. But even that mention was sufficient to trigger some concerns from, of course, countries that depend still today depending heavily on coal, like India, China, and others. So the text was not accepted, and there was, in the last minutes of the negotiations, an attempt to redraft the text in order to accommodate everybody. So just to give an example how hard it is to create such instruments or penalties, because once you try to introduce them, again, because of lobby, because of interest, of national interest, people say, no, we cannot do that at this point in time. We have to be a little bit careful here. So I think this is a good question, but I think at the same time expose the complexity and the difficulties of achieving such type of instruments or penalties in a global international arena.
Yeah, let me add to that. Pavan mentioned the Basel Convention, and the question referred to hazardous materials. Well, you know, at the beginning, I think hazardous materials basically meant poison. So they were basically controlling certain substances that you should not use in industry or commerce or whatever, because it's a danger to life and health. But when you're dealing now with oil and gas, you're talking about controlling the amount of emissions. So you can't just put under Basel the kind of things that Marcelo was talking about had been mentioned in COSP, that, you know, that this is now poisonous to use gas and from now on is going to be prohibited. It's not that simple. It doesn't work that way. So to get a consensus. So it's a difficult issue to go beyond what is sort of common sense poison, something that 100 years ago was prescribed or you could put into your product. I mean, frankly speaking, I think Coca-Cola, when it was first invented in 1905, had real cocaine in it, something like that. So, that was kind of what the Basel Convention was going towards, to make sure that we don't use hazardous materials in that sense. But to go beyond that to what we're talking about, it raises the challenges that Marcelo spoke about. Any other?
I have a point to add. I have a point to add. There is a very pertinent question that, as Anna, before leaving, she mentioned about $100 billion needed for climate finance. Question is, why it is not happening? Why the funds are not flowing in this? Why developed countries are not contributing? So one major problem is corruption. That is what I want to tell you, is people are not sure that if they send this money in the fund, they will be appropriately used. And it was already discussed, but I'm just saying, this is loss of trust, absence of trust at international level. And what is the next step? Suppose there is a climate financing, and I'm sure Marcelo must have experience in RED plus financing in some countries like Indonesia. It happened, misuse of those funds. Then what these organizations are doing, if you say World Bank, for example, if it is thrown then, and they have a debarment policy, or they have a whole system of auditing, the countries which are receiving the fund, if they are highly corrupt, then the policies are, the measures are stringent, much more stringent. And these countries feel that it is impinging on their sovereignty. You know, if the audit regulations are brought forward to save the fund, because this money is actually taxpayers' fund from other countries, they have to take care of that fund. Then it becomes a problem, and then comes the concept of de-risking, which means even if there's a fund, it is not flowing. So RED Plus, I believe that it did not succeed at least in the first 10 years because there were not enough climate financing happening. Therefore, we do not have enough empirical data to examine how corruption was playing a role in climate financing. But we're still devoid of data. It is still devoid of research. It's an area of research. And if my students, our students are listening, think about it. It's an area of study. It's an area of research, how corruption is affecting these areas. And there comes, you know, at international negotiations level, there is a stiff opposition to what you said, to bringing penalties. So all these things are linked. And in middle of everything, somewhere, is mistrust and corruption.
Marcelo, you have your hand up.
Yeah, no, I want to follow up on. It's a shame that Ana Maria had to leave us because she's much expert on climate finance than me. But anyway, I agree with you that part of the problem of not having the $100 billion or having this money going very slow to where they need to go is a little bit of what you said, lack of trust. And unfortunately, because we have bad cases, and not only in climate change, any situation you can find the bad cases, the bad seeds, and then you gain publicity around them. And then the general public, the taxpayers will believe, okay, everybody is like that. I don't want to pay my tax and my government send this money abroad. And then I will realize later on that the money that was supposed to protect the forest was used for whatever other thing. So I think this is one reason. But unfortunately, I want to believe that these cases are the few cases that, of course, they gain the publicity and is where people will pay attention, and then we're going to use this as the benchmark. But it's not necessarily the case. There was a very good RED projects around the world that use the money wisely, that has use the money correctly. Unfortunately, maybe they don't get the same amount of publicity of the bad ones. But in any case, I think we have to pay attention on these bad ones, learn from what happened to create the instruments to avoid this situation in the future. So the trust can be reestablished, or people will trust the system and will then, okay, I don't mind to pay taxes here in my country and see this money going abroad to help combat climate change in this type of projects. I trust this will be done the right way and there's going to be no corruption involved. So we have to create that trust. We have to demonstrate that. And of course, identifying the bad case, learn what is happening there. And here I think the students should play a very important role, because if you start even at academic level to do this kind of research, this will have could have very pragmatic implications in the real world. And we need this information that unfortunately I think we don't have yet enough information on those cases. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pavan. Let me deal with one final question. Sorry, Pavan, we'll get better. But one thing we've not particularly focused on, which is the cost-efficient ways that would also work for developing countries. Comment.
Come again? Sorry, I couldn't hear the question properly.
The question was, are there cost-efficient ways to deal with our climate change and corruption challenge that would also work for developing countries. And particularly in finance, I suppose you've been discussing it in terms of how that works in developing countries, or how they are in the process of trying to develop their industries. The classical, why do we have to pay for what industrialized countries have been doing for 200 years, and now they tell us we can't use coal? Comments on that? Marcelo, maybe.
It's a tough question, I would say.
Yeah, I know.
Because it's no clear answer to this question. Because when it comes to cost effective, then definitely there are certain materials, as you say, coal could be much more cost effective, and easy to handle as a source of energy. But then comes, that is why the whole climate financing is coming, that this cost is being compensated also, in some places. And this compensation is the mechanism is through climate to this carbon credits. So the industry which are saving by any chance, they have carbon credits, which if those industries which are polluting, they buy those credits. So ultimately there is a system built, but it is still not clear, not being used. Very few people in developing countries are using it. So I have no clear answer, to be very honest to this.
Yeah,
Marcelo.
Maybe, yeah, again, let's take a more concrete example. Let's think about China, that has a lot of coal, and for many years they have used and will continue to use the coal. So under the Kyoto Protocol, we can talk about later on, but there was this mechanism called Clean Development Mechanism. And China has used this mechanism to get money to implement renewable energy, particularly wind farms. So they have, they went to the carbon market and say, okay, I don't want to use coal, I want to use wind energy, but it costs more. So if you pay me the carbon credits for this, I can use. And that worked for a certain point of time, a period of time. But then some people start to realize, okay, so why we should pay for produce renewable energy in China, because who is buying these carbon credits are using, for example, public money sometimes. So there was a lot of debate in some countries say why we should pay for the renewable energy of China when China has a lot of money and they are also competing with us in many products that this renewable energy is producing. So it's not simple like that. And I think it's a good example where things can be done or through carbon markets, but to a certain point where people start to get a little bit not so comfortable, because at the end, they are paying for another country to get developed. And this country may be competing with your own country in other areas. So at the end, you may realize, well, I don't want to pay for renewable energy in China, because at the end of the day, I'm going to lose my job here because some factory in China will produce something cheaper than in my country. And then at the end of the day, I don't have a job. I pay for the renewable energy that gave me that let me get fired. It's an extreme example, but just to people to understand the connections that we have to establish here. And on top of that, if in all of these there is corruption involved, then it's becoming even more complicated.
Exactly. It's a great example of where common sense comes into it and can turn, say, your normal worker against climate change measures. And one needs to deal with these common sense type consequences. Okay. Sorry. So I think we're coming to a close. Would you like to sum up any final comments, Marcelo or Pavan?
Yeah, I will end up with a last message to who are listening here is that ultimately we all have to join hands. We have to work together, not just international people sitting at COP and discussing. I think every individual needs to be there. The civil societies need to be more active. I think this is that area which is less treaded upon. So we need to train people. And again, I'm coming back, those who are listening, is that organizations like IIA, we can develop. We have certain issues already in our master's program, but We can also develop courses where we can bring this, what we are discussing today, as a full training courses. And this needs to be, I'm not just saying IACA, but all organizations who can really do it. They are part of, if they are civil society themselves, like Transparency International, they have to develop courses, or not just to 2-3 hours, but a continuous basis. People should be engaged, sensitized, made aware how to react to these situations. Whistleblowing, which has been a very important issue, because it's not easy. It's easy to say whistleblowing, but there are so many climate-related issues where whistleblowers will retaliate. Now we need a holistic solution. So all these things are necessary, and yes, it's a good beginning today, I would say, and thank you for my colleagues inviting me for the panel, and UNITAR colleagues, and thank you so much from my side.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want also to thank, because it was a great learning exercise for me as well. And I want to emphasize, I think the education here is key. Climate change is complicated, corruption is complicated, both things together is even more complicated. So I think we have to put, and as I said, we have smart people everywhere, and these smart people should think together on how to make things happen. And again, I want to go back to my initial points. We have to respect and understand people that are defending coal, the people that are doing deforestation. Again, at the end of the day, I don't believe these are bad people that want to just get money and doesn't care about the environment, doesn't care about future generations. I believe we all do things for many reasons, and we have to understand what these reasons are and try to create the conditions then to migrate from this situation to another one. And this will take time, this will take money, but also it needs to be a lot of education around those issues. So I think I invite very much IACA to continue this effort, to combine those two areas that are very complicated, and we think together on solutions for both cases. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate here.
Well, thank you again to both of you, and to Anna Maria. Those are two terrific concluding statements, and provide us a direction and to use a phrase too often used, the way forward. So, Katerina, any final comments? Otherwise, I wish to thank all of the participants and the panelists very much.
Also from my side, a big thank you to all for the participation and for all the questions and comments. And I hope to see you soon again.
Okay, very good. Thank you again. All the best.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.